When we think of Anne Frank, we almost always picture her diary, that powerful voice of hope coming from a hidden attic. But what happened after the diary ends, after the last page was written? Well, that's what we're going to explore, the harrowing, often untold final chapter of her life.
And that line, wow, it just perfectly sets the stage, doesn't it? The silence of the annex wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a whole new nightmare, one that unfolded across a series of concentration camps, each one a unique circle of hell.
The first stop on this terrible journey was a place in the Netherlands called Westerbork. Now, this wasn't a final destination. Think of it more like a processing center, the chilling, bureaucratic start to a system designed to strip away every piece of your humanity.
There's something so disturbing about that term, transit camp. It sounds so sterile, so temporary. But let's be clear, its purpose was absolutely sinister. It was a place where people weren't killed, but were prepared to be killed. It was an assembly line for the death camps.
Can you just imagine this psychological torture? It wasn't only the horrible conditions, the noise, the filth, the sickness. It was the waiting and the specific, scheduled terror of Tuesday nights. That was the night the lists were read, the night the trains left for Auschwitz. Every single week, your life was a roll of the dice.
And then their turn came. On September 3, 1944, the names of the Frank family were on the list. And what's so haunting about this is that it wasn't just any transport. It was the last one, the absolute final train to leave the Netherlands for Auschwitz. The door had just slammed shut.
So, from Westerbork, the journey itself becomes this descent, a trip into literal darkness, into the suffocating heart of the Nazi war machine.
And it all starts here, in a sealed cattle car. Not a passenger car, a cattle car. The message couldn't be clearer. You are no longer human. You are cargo.
Just think about that. Sealed in total darkness. No light, no air, stripped of the most basic human dignities. The space itself was a weapon of terror.
3 days, 72 hours locked in that suffocating box. No food, no water, nothing. Just the crushing heat and the overwhelming sounds of desperation. It must have felt like an absolute eternity.
But even in that darkness, something incredible was happening. A survivor later remembered this about Anne. In the middle of all that horror, a world literally designed to crush the human spirit, she was comforting other people. Her gentleness was still there. It's just an unbelievable testament to who she was.
The train finally shuddered to a halt. They had arrived. But this wasn't just a camp. This was Auschwitz.
And you have to get this distinction. It is so, so important. Auschwitz wasn't a camp in any way we'd understand it. It was a factory, an industrialized death factory, engineered with terrifying efficiency for one product and one product only: mass murder.
The second they stepped onto that platform, it was chaos. Smoke, guards shouting, and families were ripped apart instantly, right there. Men to one side, women and children to the other. No time for a single word, no time for a last goodbye.
And right there, on that platform, that was it. That was the last time Anne would ever see her father, Otto. Just a fleeting glimpse of his silhouette disappearing into the crowd. The final, brutal end of their family.
From that moment on, for Anne and her sister Margot, it was all about systematic dehumanization. Their heads were shaved. Their identities were stripped away, replaced by a tattooed number. They weren't people anymore. They were just laboring bodies, to be used until they broke.
You'd think it couldn't get any worse, but their journey wasn't over. As the war was grinding to an end, the sisters were moved again, this time to a place called Bergen Belsen, which turned out to be a different kind of hell altogether.
Now, Bergen Belsen was different from Auschwitz. There were no gas chambers. But don't mistake that for mercy. Death was absolutely everywhere. It was just slower. It came from starvation, from exposure, and from disease. So what was life like there? It was just unending misery. A constant, gnawing starvation. Rampant diseases, especially typhus, that tore through the filthy barracks. It was mud, lice, and bodies. Bodies just piling up everywhere, faster than anyone could deal with them.
And yet, even in this absolute pit of despair, that spark in Anne was still there. Other survivors remember her singing to the younger kids, trying to distract them, talking about what she would do after the war.
clinging to the idea of a future.
But in the end, hope just wasn't enough to fight off reality. The typhus epidemic that swept through the camp, it was like wildfire. It was unstoppable. That brutal winter basically turned the entire camp into a frozen graveyard.
So, after this unimaginable journey, Anne Frank's life was extinguished. But her voice, well, her voice is another story entirely.
When you look at what this journey really was, it was the complete, systematic destruction of a person. Step by step, her childhood, her innocence, her very identity, it was all stripped away until nothing was left.
And that's the incredible, heartbreaking paradox of her story, isn't it? The Nazi regime succeeded in physically erasing her life, but they completely failed to erase her voice. Because of that diary she left behind in the annex, her story would not only be recovered, but it would be heard by the entire world.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. It's a question to sit with. How does a voice survive when a life is so brutally erased? How do words on a page become so powerful that they can outlive their author and give a young girl a kind of immortality that her murderers could never take away?